Hello family of Fortnite, BallaTW here, and throughout the Fortnite Champion Series, we're going to be trying to get more acquainted with the world of competitive Fortnite. Today, we're going to be discussing the 3 different stages of a competitive Fortnite game: the early game, the mid game, and the late game, and what different players have as their goals during these stages in order to achieve the ultimate goal, the Victory Royale. Let's start with the early game. Also called the looting phase, this is where all players are attempting to secure their chosen landing spot and maximize their loot potential. In competitive Fortnite, every game matters, so players try to strike a balance between high loot opportunity and safety so as to not waste a game by being eliminated early. Do you drop at a high loot POI like Retail Row or Paradise Palms? Or land at a safer POI on the edge of the map, where less players drop because of less loot? Regardless, the goal is common. Whether you take a passive approach by looting safely on the side of the map, or an aggressive and risky approach by letting others loot for you and finding early eliminations. Now that we know what the early game is, what should we be looking out for during this stage? First things first, being contested. The first realization players make when landing is whether you're being contested or not, to prepare for the upcoming possible fight. Trios want to try to force your opponent into the more disadvantageous position cut off from loot potential. Either they have to make a desperation push, or they're stuck with less loot where you can easily clean up. That's just the beginning, as even though it starts off high intensity with all the different POIs being contested, it quickly slows down as the rotations begin towards first zone. Looting doesn't end here, and most competitive players will have a loot path which optimizes their possibility for finding the crucial mobility and weapon upgrades. Thanks to the new battle map feature in the replay mode, we can study these loot paths and rotations quite easily these days. So go check that out in any replay from the Fortnite Champion Series by going into the Compete tab and finding your favorite player. It will vary from game to game, but generally, we move into the mid game around the middle to end of second zone. The mid game is the calm before the storm, before the storm circle gets too small where it forces the engagements. Most players' goals are positional, but in some cases, depending on how the early game went, you again have to strike a balance, this time between looting and farming, or going for the best position. Looting could include playing extremely aggressive to earn yourself other players' loot. In trios, it's much harder to play that aggressive playstyle, since fights take longer and cost more. You want to be efficient with any rotations or fights you have to take. You don't want to spend your precious mobility, valuable resources, or health. This is why you'll see a lot of the top players look directly for center zone in the mid game. When you're in the center zone, you end up giving yourself the most chance of being in the next storm circle when it gets revealed. You'll then have to go less distance and thus spend less materials. Finally, the end game, the most exciting, hectic, thrilling, and difficult part of competitive Fortnite. Experiencing an endgame can be confusing and hard to process, but it will also be one of the most rewarding and fun times to play and watch. This is when you take all the advantages you built in the early game and the mid game and use them to push yourself to a Victory Royale, and also find as many eliminations as possible. In the current Fortnite Champion Series format, every elimination matters, just like it did in the World Cup. From 6th zone onwards, where the calm from the mid game explodes into a cacophony of tunneling, mobility usage, and shots being fired, you'll see teams go for the ever so advantageous high ground, where they can tunnel very cheaply and have the most opportunity on the rest of the server for eliminations, as they have the top-down view. You'll also see teams call out the need to find a good layer, which is away from other players, both above, below, and horizontally from you. You'll see teams desperate for the extra materials to last them through to the full zone closure, going for impact eliminations, where they can top off on resources and power weaponry of their fallen opponents. So, whether you're watching or you're joining us on the field, take stock in the stage of the game. The early game, when you're trying to get the best possible loot while it's still available. The mid game, where you're balancing positioning while maintaining what you built during the early game. And finally, the end game, where you spend all the advantages you set yourself up with to earn the Victory Royale. Use this to form your game plan in order to earn as many series points weekend after weekend. And maybe next time, we'll be watching and highlighting your top plays. This was BallaTW, and I'll see you in game.